I am Joshua, 32 years old, and I came home to my entire life dumped on the front lawn while my family threw a party to celebrate kicking me out. Thank you for being here. Please comment with a why, so I know you're ready and willing to listen to my story. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember the exact day because I had just spent 11 hours at the logistics company where I worked as a regional manager. I was exhausted, my shoulders ached, and my tie felt like a noose by the time I pulled into the neighborhood. I had just received a promotion that morning, a real, solid promotion that came with a significant bump in my salary. All day, I had this naive, warm feeling in my chest. I thought about taking my family out to a nice steakhouse to celebrate. I thought, finally, my dad would look at me and give me that firm nod of approval I had been chasing since I was 10 years old. I thought my mom would smile and say she was proud. Instead, I turned my car onto my street and saw a massive glare of floodlights illuminating our front yard. First, I thought there was an emergency. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hit the gas, speeding up the last few hundred yards. But as I got closer, the flashing lights weren't from police cruisers or fire trucks. They were from rented party strobes. Loud, obnoxious country music was vibrating the windows of my sedan. I put the car in park at the edge of the driveway and just sat there. My brain refused to process the scene. Spread across the damp grass, illuminated by the harsh lights, were my belongings. My clothes, my winter coats, the expensive leather boots I bought for work, my books, my laptop stand, my shaving kit. Everything I owned, dumped haphazardly like trash bags ripped open by wild animals. Some of my dress shirts were caught in the rose bushes. And behind this sea of my scattered life stood my family, my relatives, my blood. They were holding red plastic cups, laughing, drinking, and pointing. My uncle, my cousins, my parents' friends from the neighborhood. Strangers I barely recognized. Strung up between the two large oak trees in the front yard was a massive, professionally printed white banner. The bold red letters screamed, "Go away, freeloader. Don't ever come back." I unbuckled my seatbelt. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a sudden, freezing shock that paralyzed my nerves. I stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under my shoes, and the sound of my car door closing made a few heads turn. Aunt Karen was the first to spot me. She was swaying near the porch steps, a margarita glass sloshing in her hand. Her face was flushed, her makeup smeared. She pointed a manicured finger right at my chest and hollered over the music. "Look who finally decided to show up, over 30 years old and still a nobody, still living under mommy and daddy's roof. Good riddance." The crowd erupted into laughter. Real, genuine laughter. They were enjoying this. They were celebrating my humiliation. I looked past Karen and found my mother, Elaine. She was standing near the snack table. When our eyes met, she didn't rush forward. She didn't look horrified. She just pressed her lips together, folded her arms, and looked away. That small, cowardly gesture felt like a knife slipping between my ribs. Then, the crowd parted, and my father, Daniel, walked forward. He was wearing his favorite polo shirt, looking entirely too pleased with himself. He held a paper plate in one hand. He stopped about 10 feet from me, looked me dead in the eye, and smiled. It wasn't an angry smile. It was the smug, triumphant smirk of a man who thought he had just won a war. He picked up a grilled hot dog from his plate and casually tossed it through the air. It landed with a soft, pathetic thud right next to my right shoe. "Your last free meal, son," he said, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Time to be a real man. Get off my property." My younger brother, Elijah, the golden child of the family, was standing on the porch holding his phone up. He was live-streaming it, the whole thing, my public execution. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to charge forward, to flip the tables, to yell until my throat bled. I wanted to ask them who they thought paid the mortgage they were standing on. I wanted to ask Daniel who paid for the groceries he was tossing at my feet. But I didn't. I looked at the hot dog. I looked at the banner. I looked at the faces of my so-called family, twisted in ugly, drunken amusement. And suddenly the anger vanished. It was replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't say a single word. I raised the camera. Snap. A photo of my belongings scattered like garbage. Snap. A photo of the giant insulting banner. Snap. A photo of Daniel, Karen, and my mother standing under the floodlights. I lowered my phone, turned my back on them, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't salvage my clothes. I left it all on the lawn. I drove into the night, leaving the music and the laughter behind. I drove aimlessly for about an hour. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and my breathing was shallow. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I could never go back to that house. I pulled into a dingy, run-down motel on the outskirts of town, but the neon no vacancy sign flickered mockingly at me. I pulled over at a gas station and started searching my phone. I needed an apartment. Not next week, not tomorrow. Tonight. I found a listing for a cheap, short-term rental complex in an industrial part of the city. I called the number. Miraculously, a gruff-sounding man named Carter answered. I offered him double the deposit if he could meet me with the keys in 20 minutes. He agreed. The building was a grim, brutalist block of concrete. The hallways smelled like stale tobacco and boiled cabbage. Carter, an older guy with tired eyes and a thick jacket, handed me a single brass key. Unit 304. Door sticks a little. You gotta lift the handle while you push. No loud music after 10. I handed him the cash, took the key, and walked up the 3 flights of stairs. I stood in front of the peeling brown door of 304. I did what he said, lifted the handle, pushed my shoulder against the wood, and stumbled inside. I flipped the light switch. A single, bare bulb flickered to life on the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across a tiny, empty room. The carpet was stained. The walls were a faded, depressing beige, and the kitchen consisted of a sink, a mini fridge, and a hot plate. There was no furniture, just an old radiator hissing in the corner. I locked the door behind me. I walked to the center of the room and sat down on the rough carpet. I was still wearing my work suit. The tie finally loosened around my neck. I waited for the panic to set in. I waited for the crushing weight of homelessness, of rejection, to suffocate me. But it didn't come. Instead, I listened. I heard the faint hum of the mini-fridge. I heard a siren wailing miles away. I heard the wind rattling the single-pane window. For the first time in over a decade, I didn't hear my name being shouted. Joshua, the sink is backed up. Joshua, your brother needs a ride. Joshua, did you transfer the money for the insurance? The silence was deafening. It was thick, heavy, and absolutely beautiful. In that run-down, empty room, I realized how much noise I had been living in. I had spent my entire adult life as a shock absorber for their chaos. I was the manager, the ATM, the fixer. And now I was just a guy sitting on a dirty carpet in Unit 304. And I was breathing freely. I didn't have a bed, so I leaned my back against the wall and pulled out my phone. The battery was at 30%. I opened my photo gallery, intending to look at the pictures I had taken of the lawn. But my thumb slipped, and I started scrolling up through the years, up through the history of the Grayson family. People usually keep photos of vacations, birthdays, and smiling faces. My gallery was a graveyard of digital receipts. I stopped at a screenshot from 3 years ago. It was a bank transfer confirmation, $3,000. I remembered that day clearly. Daniel had walked into the kitchen, his face pale, waving a letter from the county. The property taxes were wildly overdue, and they were threatening a lien on the house. He didn't ask me for help. He just threw the letter on the counter, looked at me, and said, "I guess we'll be living in a tent next month." I had emptied my savings account that afternoon. He never said thank you. I scrolled further. A picture of a rusted water pipe. That was the plumbing disaster of 2021. $2,000. A screenshot of a tuition payment portal. That was Elijah's college fund. The boy couldn't keep a part-time job to save his life, so I covered his books, his dorm fees, his meal plans, the pharmacy receipt, Elaine's expensive brand-name medications that she insisted on over the generics. Every swipe of my thumb was a testament to my financial bleeding. I was looking at the architecture of my own enslavement. They called me a freeloader. Aunt Karen yelled it. Daniel printed it on a massive banner. But the truth, the ugly, undeniable truth staring back at me from the glowing screen of my phone, was that I was the foundation of that house. I paid the utility bills. I covered the mortgage shortfalls. I funded their comfortable middle-class illusion. They didn't hate me because I was a burden. They hated me because my very presence was a constant reminder of their own incompetence. They resented the hand that fed them, so they decided to bite it off in front of an audience. I locked the phone and rested my head against the cold drywall. The anger I hadn't felt on the lawn finally arrived. It didn't burn hot. It settled in my stomach like a block of ice. I wasn't going to cry over a family that treated me like a disposable wallet. I was going to shut the vault. I must have dozed off sitting up, because the sharp buzz of my phone vibrating against the floorboards jolted me awake. The room was pitch black. The streetlights outside cast long, skeletal shadows across the carpet. I blindly reached out, grabbed the phone, and squinted at the screen. It was 2:14 a.m. Less than 7 hours had passed since I was publicly humiliated and tossed into the street like yesterday's garbage. The text message was from Elijah. I stared at his name. A part of me, the pathetic, conditioned older brother part of me, thought maybe he was checking in. Maybe the party had ended. The alcohol had worn off, and he realized how insane the night had been. Maybe he was asking if I had a place to sleep. I opened the message. Hey man, Mom's crying. The electric company sent a final notice today. The bill is super overdue. Dad is asleep and he gets mad when we ask about bills. Can you at least send over $400 to cover it so the power doesn't get cut tomorrow? I read it once. Then I read it again. My jaw clamped shut so hard my teeth ached. A vein throbbed against my temple. Can you at least send over $400? Not are you okay? Not where are you? Not I'm sorry they did that. Less than half a day after throwing my clothes into the dirt, after his father threw food at my feet, after he himself live-streamed my exile for internet points. He had the absolute, unmitigated gall to ask me to pay the electric bill. It was breathtaking. It was a level of entitlement so profound it bordered on mental illness. They had genuinely convinced themselves that kicking me out was a separate event from my financial utility. They thought they could banish the sun but keep the ATM. I didn't type a furious reply. I didn't call him and scream. Doing that would mean I still cared enough to fight. Instead, I pressed my thumb on the screen, swiped left on his conversation thread, and hit delete. Then, I went to his contact profile and hit block. I lay down on the hard carpet, using my suit jacket as a pillow, and stared at the ceiling. The block of ice in my stomach hardened into solid steel. They wanted me gone. Fine. But they were going to learn very quickly that when the freeloader leaves, the free ride ends. At 8 a.m. the next morning, I was the first person standing outside the glass doors of my bank. My suit was wrinkled, and I probably smelled like a concrete hallway, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The moment the doors unlocked, I walked straight to a teller. I need to open a completely new checking and savings account. Individual, no joint access, and I need to move every cent from my current accounts into the new ones, effective immediately. The teller, a kind woman in her 50s, processed the paperwork. While she typed, I opened the HR portal on my phone and rerouted my new, larger salary directly into the new account number. All right, Mr. Grayson, the teller said, handing me a stack of papers. Your old accounts are now closed. No auto drafts will process through them. Thank you, I said. I went to a coffee shop next door, ordered a large black coffee, and opened my laptop. I had work to do. I logged into the electric company, the water company, the internet provider, the streaming services, the car insurance portal. One by one, I went into the payment settings and deleted my credit card information. I removed my name from the autopay features. I unlinked my bank accounts from my mother's PayPal and Elijah's Venmo. I was systematically dismantling the invisible infrastructure that kept the Grayson household running. As I was going through my recent bank statements to ensure I hadn't missed any recurring charges, a specific transaction caught my eye. It was a withdrawal from 5 weeks ago. $8,000. I frowned, tracing the line with my finger. Ah yes, the emergency roof fund. Daniel had called me at work in a panic, claiming the roof over the garage was caving in and the contractor needed a massive deposit immediately or water would destroy the foundation. I had wired the money that same day. I had been working overtime to rebuild my savings ever since. I remembered something. Last week, Daniel had driven up to the house in a pristine, lightly used Porsche Macan. He strutted around the driveway, telling the neighbors he got a steal at the dealership and that a man of his age deserved a little luxury. When I asked him how he afforded it, he brushed me off, saying he had moved some investments around. I pulled up the routing information on the $8,000 transfer. I traced the receiving account number. It didn't belong to a local roofing contractor. It belonged to an auto financing firm. I sat back in my chair, the coffee turning bitter in my mouth. There was no roof emergency. He had taken my money I had worked nights and weekends for, and used it as a down payment for a luxury sports car so he could look like a big shot to his golf buddies. And a month later, he threw a hot dog at my feet and kicked me out. At that time, I didn't know how high the price they would pay for their wickedness would be. I closed the laptop. The audit was complete. The bridges were burned. Now all I had to do was sit back and watch the fire spread. A week passed. I bought a cheap mattress, a decent coffee maker, and a small table for the apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. At work, my promotion kept me busy. I was managing larger accounts, traveling a bit, and for the first time, my entire paycheck stayed in my own bank account. Seeing the numbers go up instead of instantly draining out was a strange, intoxicating feeling. I didn't hear a word from my family. I had blocked Elijah, but my parents' numbers were still open. They were stubbornly playing the waiting game, assuming I was suffering in silence and would eventually come crawling back to beg for my old room. They were wrong. On a Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mason, a guy I used to work with who happened to live 2 streets over from my parents. Mason was a good guy, a straight shooter, and a loyal ally when things got tough at the old job. "Hey Josh," Mason said, his voice sounding a bit hesitant. "You doing okay, man?" "I'm good, Mason. Never better, actually." "Why?" "Well, things are getting pretty loud over at your dad's place. I was walking my dog past your house last night, and Daniel was out on the driveway screaming into his cell phone. Something about the Wi-Fi being shut off and threatening to sue the cable company. I let out a short, genuine laugh. "Yeah, they probably missed a payment." "Missed a payment?" "Josh, the guy from the utility company was out there this morning putting a tag on the meter. I think they're cutting the power. Are you sure everything is all right? You haven't been around." "I moved out, Mason," I said simply. "Or rather, I was moved out." Mason went silent for a moment. He knew how much I did for that family. "Damn," he muttered. "Well, whatever you did, the place is falling apart without you. Your mom was in the front yard crying to the mailman." I thanked Mason for the update and hung up. The dominoes were starting to fall. The Wi-Fi was the first casualty. A minor inconvenience, but in a house built on screens and distractions, it was the first crack in the foundation. The lack of internet hit Elijah the hardest. My brother was 22, taking business classes at the local community college, and he treated life like an extended vacation. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one whose potential was always nurtured, mostly with my money. I didn't have to be there to know exactly how his week went down. He had a massive final qualification test for his real estate licensing course. For the past 2 years, I was the one who woke him up. I was the one who made sure his laptop was charged. I was the one who paid his registration fees. I was the guardrails keeping his life on the track. Without me there to manage his schedule, and without Wi-Fi at the house to check his portal, Elijah overslept. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that Elijah had sprinted into the testing center 45 minutes late, completely unkempt. The proctor, a strict older man named Joseph, wasn't having any of it. Joseph was a guy who respected hard work and punctuality, two things Elijah lacked. Elijah tried to throw a tantrum. He tried to blame the traffic, the internet at home, his parents. Joseph just looked at him over his glasses, shook his head, and shut the door in his face. Elijah failed the course. He lost his enrollment fee. His grand plan of becoming a hotshot real estate agent vanished because there was no older brother to drag him out of bed. The safety net was gone, and the golden child had finally hit the concrete. While Elijah was failing out of life, Daniel was facing his own structural collapse. Remember the rusted plumbing from a few years ago? Well, the old water heater in the basement finally gave out entirely. It didn't just leak, it ruptured. Normally, Daniel would have screamed for me, and I would have spent my Saturday in the basement with a wrench, or I would have paid a professional emergency plumber $300 an hour to fix it. This time, Daniel was alone, and he had no money because his disposable income was locked into the monthly payments for his precious Porsche. The basement flooded. The drywall soaked up the water like a sponge, ruining the flooring and causing a massive mold hazard. The stress of living in a dark, cold, damp house with no internet and a failing son began to eat Daniel alive. Daniel was a man who needed to feel superior. He derived his worth from projecting authority. But authority is cheap when someone else is paying the bills. Daniel worked as a middle manager at an auto parts distribution center. His boss, Wyatt, was a no-nonsense executive who demanded results. By the end of the second week, Daniel's home life bled into his work. He showed up late. His clothes were wrinkled because Elaine couldn't run the washing machine. He was sleep-deprived and furious at the world. During a major vendor meeting, Wyatt asked Daniel for a quarterly report. Daniel, completely disorganized and strung out, didn't have it. When Wyatt reprimanded him in front of the team, Daniel snapped. The fragile ego of a man whose house was sinking got the better of him. He yelled at Wyatt. He threw a folder across the conference table. You can't throw a hot dog at your boss and expect them to take it. Wyatt fired him on the spot. Security escorted Daniel out of the building. The paper crown had caught fire, and the king was officially unemployed. By day 14, my phone finally started buzzing with incoming traffic from the family. The silence had broken, replaced by the desperate sounds of a sinking ship. Elaine texted first. The messages came in rapid bursts, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Joshua, please, we need to talk. Your father is under so much stress, he lost his job. Elijah is depressed. The house smells like mildew. We are family, Joshua. Please come home. I stared at the text. Please come home. Not because they missed me. Not because they realized they were wrong. Because the house smelled like mildew and the wallets were empty. Before I could even process her message, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. Aunt Karen. The same Aunt Karen who, 2 weeks ago, was drunkenly screaming that I was a nobody and cheering as my life was thrown onto the grass. I answered, putting her on speakerphone, purely out of morbid curiosity. Joshua, sweetie, how are you holding up? Her voice was sickly sweet, coated in fake warmth. I'm fine, Karen. What do you want? I asked flatly. She cleared her throat, suddenly nervous. Well, things are a little tight right now. My car needs new brakes, and your father usually helps me out, but he's having some trouble. I was wondering, since you don't have rent at the big house anymore, if you could loan your favorite aunt $500? Just until next month. I gripped the edge of my table. The absolute sheer audacity of these people. She helped orchestrate my public humiliation, laughed in my face, and now she wanted a payday loan. Karen, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. If you ever call this number again, I will post the video of you drunkenly screaming on the lawn to your church's Facebook group. I hung up and blocked her number. My phone buzzed again. Elaine, can we meet? Please, I'm asking as your mother. At the coffee shop on 5th Street. Tomorrow at noon. I looked out the window of my small apartment. The city was moving on, completely unaware of the absolute devastation happening in the Grayson household. I had watched them suffer from afar. Now it was time to look them in the eyes. I typed a single word and hit send. Okay. The coffee shop on 5th Street was a neutral ground. It was quiet, filled with people on laptops and couples speaking in hushed tones. It wasn't a place where people could scream without looking insane. That was deliberate on my part. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered a black coffee, and took a seat in the back corner. I wore a tailored suit from my new position. I looked sharp, rested, and untouchable. At exactly noon, the bell over the door chimed. Elaine and Elijah walked in. They looked awful. Elaine had dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was unwashed, and she was wearing a wrinkled sweater. Elijah looked like a ghost. He was slouching, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. They spotted me and hurried over. They sat down across from me. Elaine immediately reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. I pulled my hand back and wrapped it around my coffee cup. Joshua, Elaine started, her voice trembling. Right on cue, the tears welled up in her eyes. The public, pathetic tears designed to make me feel like a monster. I am so sorry. Things have gotten so out of hand. Your father was emotional. We were all emotional. Nobody meant for it to go this far. I didn't blink. I reached into my inside jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the photo gallery. I turned the screen toward her and slid it across the table. It was the picture of the massive banner, "Go away, freeloader." How exactly else was I supposed to take a planned party celebrating my exile, Mom? My voice was low, steady, and devoid of any warmth. You rented lights. You printed a banner. You invited the neighborhood to watch. Elaine looked away, wiping her eyes frantically. Elijah shifted in his seat. He looked at the table, his hands fidgeting. Then he spoke, delivering the most honest, pathetic truth of the entire ordeal. "We didn't think you'd actually leave us to deal with all this, man," Elijah mumbled. "Dad said you'd sleep in your car for a weekend, get scared, and come back apologizing." I stared at my brother. There it was. The grand strategy. It wasn't just an eviction. It was a psychological breakdown tactic. They wanted to humiliate me so severely, break my spirit so completely, that I would crawl back, grateful to be allowed inside, and never dare question their authority or my financial obligations again. They didn't want to get rid of me. They wanted to domesticate me. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. I opened it and spread the papers across the small cafe table. Utility bills, grocery totals, repair invoices, bank transfers for Elijah's tuition, the $8,000 transfer for the roof. "This is what family looked like when I was the one carrying all of you," I said, tapping the papers. "I funded this family for a decade. I was the safety net, the emergency fund, and the punching bag." Elaine stared at the numbers. She knew I paid a lot, but seeing it all laid out, the sheer volume of money, seemed to physically shrink her. "We failed you," she whispered. "Failure is private," I snapped back. "What you did was public, deliberate, and proud." Elaine finally stopped crying and got down to business. "The real reason they were here. Joshua, the mortgage is a month behind. The bank is sending letters. If you could just help us catch up, just temporarily." My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message from Daniel, sent to Elaine's phone, which she had left face up on the table. The screen illuminated, and I could read it clearly. "Daniel, if he doesn't come back with you, ask him if he understands what happens to the family name if this house goes into foreclosure." He wasn't sorry. He was worried about his image. I stood up. I buttoned my suit jacket. I looked down at the two people who used to be my world. "No money," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet cafe. "No moving back. No shared accounts. No rescue." Elijah looked up, panicked. "So what are we supposed to do?" "Sell the Porsche, Elijah. Cut your expenses. Get a job. Do what adults do when they run out of other people's money. I gathered my papers, slipped them back into my briefcase, and dropped a $5 bill on the table for my coffee. You threw a party because you believed my value ended the moment I stopped being useful to you, I said, looking right into Elaine's eyes. Now the party is over. The bills are real. And I am not carrying this family one more day. I turned around and walked out of the coffee shop, stepping into the bright afternoon sun. I didn't look back. For 3 agonizingly quiet days after I walked out of that coffee shop, nobody from my family contacted me. There were no missed calls. There were no angry voicemails from Daniel trying to desperately reassert his dominance over the situation. There were no panicked text messages from Elijah begging for grocery money. The absolute silence should have felt peaceful to a normal person, but I knew my family entirely too well by then. It did not feel peaceful at all. It felt highly strategic. It felt like the heavy, suffocating air right before a tornado touches down. When their aggressive anger failed to bring me to my knees, they tried guilt. When public guilt failed at the coffee shop, they tried softness and disguised it as maternal love. So, when I received a text message from Elaine on a Tuesday evening asking if she could drop by my apartment just to talk calmly, I already knew there was a massive trap hidden underneath the visit. She said she simply wanted to bring a small houseplant to congratulate me on my new place. I replied with my address. I did not say yes because I trusted her suddenly. I said yes because I wanted to see exactly how far she would go now that absolute, undeniable desperation had replaced her foolish pride. My apartment was small, cramped, and plain. The furniture was incredibly cheap, the curtains did not match the carpet, and I only had one floor lamp that made the living room feel slightly warmer than it really was. But before she arrived, I caught myself doing something deeply pathetic. I started frantically straightening up the room. I started arranging the cheap magazines on the coffee table. I was instinctively making space for her comfort while completely ignoring my own boundaries. I stopped myself immediately. I dropped the magazine I was holding back onto the table. This was my home now. She could enter it, but she could absolutely not control the atmosphere inside it. When Elaine finally knocked on door 304, she was holding a potted green fern in one hand and a white bakery box in the other. She stepped inside my apartment with that careful, tight smile people wear when they want credit for trying before they have actually done anything meaningful. She looked around the cramped living space, her eyes scanning the peeling paint near the baseboards. She forced a bright tone and said the place was very cozy. She said I had done incredibly well for myself given the circumstances. She even looked me directly in the eye and said she was proud of me for landing on my feet so quickly. That specific word almost made me laugh out loud. Proud. She was not proud when my belongings were thrown out onto the damp lawn for the neighbors to see. She was not proud when Daniel humiliated me in front of our relatives. But now that I had survived without them, she desperately wanted to admire the result. For the first 10 minutes, she kept the conversation incredibly light and breezy. She asked about my new neighborhood. She asked about my recent promotion at work and my new salary. She asked if I was sleeping better away from the noise of the suburbs. Then, exactly like clockwork, the questions shifted. Was rent expensive in this part of town? Was I managing all right on my own financially? Had I been able to save a good amount of money since moving out? I knew this toxic pattern in my bones. First came the fake maternal concern. Then came the practical questions about my finances. And finally, the massive request hidden inside a thick layer of family duty. Elaine reached into her oversized leather purse and pulled out a thick white envelope. She placed it right on the center of my cheap coffee table. She kept her hand flat over it, looking up at me with watering eyes. I did not speak. I leaned forward and firmly pulled the envelope out from under her hand. I opened the flap. Inside were 3 final overdue notices from utility companies, a severe mortgage warning from the bank, a late payment reminder for Daniel's ridiculous Porsche, and a handwritten list of household expenses. At the very bottom of the stack was one sentence written in Elaine's neat handwriting. Even if you don't come back, you can still do the right thing as our son. I looked up from the piece of paper. I looked right at the woman who helped raise me, the woman who stood silently while I was banished. So this is why you really came. Elaine started crying immediately, but these were not the raw, embarrassed tears from the coffee shop. These tears felt thin, frustrated, and angry. She raised her voice, saying she did not know what else to do. She said Daniel was completely impossible to live with since he lost his job. She even mentioned the word divorce, claiming the financial stress was tearing their marriage apart. She said Elijah was falling apart, and the house was literally drowning in debt. I handed the envelope back to her and stood up. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. I told her I was not paying one more bill for people who had celebrated getting rid of me. She grabbed the envelope, took her plant back, and walked out. The apartment felt instantly cleaner. 2 days after Elaine took her miserable potted fern and her stack of overdue bills back to the crumbling Grayson house, the phone calls started again. This time it was Daniel. I almost ignored the incoming call when his name flashed on my screen, but a dark, curious part of me wanted to hear exactly how a man sounds when his massive, fragile pride starts collapsing under real, unyielding consequences. I hit accept and put the phone to my ear without saying a word. His voice was much lower than usual. It was slower, too, as if every single word had to cross a field of broken glass to get out of his throat. He cleared his throat loudly before speaking. He said he wanted to meet face to face, man to man, to hash this entire misunderstanding out. I told him he could say whatever he needed to say right then over the phone, or I would hang up immediately. There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line. Then, Daniel finally admitted the house was in serious financial trouble. He confessed he had been incredibly angry for months. He was angry about money, ashamed that things were unstable, and bitter that the entire family had become completely dependent on my salary to survive. He said nobody in that house wanted to admit it was charity. He admitted that when Aunt Karen and the relatives started joking about me that night, he joined in because it felt easier than stopping them. It felt easier than defending me in front of his peers. It was simply easier to toss a hot dog at my feet than to admit the person he mocked the loudest was the only one holding the roof over his head. I listened to him talk longer than he deserved. I wanted to know if real accountability would ever fully form in his mind. It almost did. And then, true to his arrogant nature, he ruined it completely. "I know we hurt you, Joshua," Daniel said, his tone suddenly shifting back to the authoritative father figure. "But if you understand what is at stake here, maybe you will see why we need to move past it. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm telling you we need to move past it. For the family name. The neighbors are starting to talk." He was acting as if my pain became unreasonable the exact second the people who caused it needed financial efficiency. I did not yell. I did not argue with his twisted logic. I just told him I had a legal document to send him, and after he read it, there would be absolutely nothing left to discuss. I hung up the phone. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was my Uncle David. David was Daniel's older brother. He had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed out of the family drama and minded his own business. When I answered, David used his best wise elder voice. "Joshua, listen to me," David said softly, trying to sound like a mediator. "I know your dad messed up. He's an idiot. But you are a grown man with a good salary. You need to be the bigger person here. They are going to lose the house. Just send them enough to cover the mortgage for a few months until your dad finds another job." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Why are you so invested in this suddenly, David? You weren't at the party. You didn't care when my belongings were thrown into the dirt." David cleared his throat nervously. "Because we are family. And well, Daniel called me this morning crying. He asked me for a $10,000 loan. Joshua, I can't afford that. My kids have their college fund to worry about. If you don't step up and handle your parents right now, he is going to keep coming to me and the rest of the family for handouts. You need to fix this so he leaves us alone." I laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound that echoed in the empty apartment. Uncle David did not care about my relationship with my parents. He did not care about the house. He was just terrified that the financial parasite I had been feeding for 10 years was suddenly looking at his wallet. "I am not a human shield for your bank account, David," I said sharply. "Tell Daniel no. It is a very easy word to learn. I highly recommend you practice it." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the couch. I realized right then that simply cutting them off and ignoring their phone calls was not going to be enough. As long as they believed they were entitled to my money, they would keep trying to break down my door. They would keep sending flying monkeys like Uncle David to guilt-trip me into submission. I needed to build a massive, impenetrable wall they could never climb over. The very next morning, I took a half-day off from work. I walked into a sleek, glass-paneled downtown office building and took the elevator to the 14th floor. I had an appointment with a lawyer named Matthew. Matthew was sharp, highly calculating, and specialized in civil litigation and asset recovery. His office smelled like expensive leather and fresh coffee, a stark contrast to the chaotic, noisy lawn party I had been subjected to just weeks prior. I sat across from his heavy oak desk and opened my leather briefcase. I pulled out the exact same manila folder I had shown my mother at the coffee shop. I laid the documents out on his desk one by one. The utility bills, the tuition payments, and, most importantly, the wire transfer receipts for the $8,000 roof repair that mysteriously turned into a down payment for Daniel's luxury Porsche. I explained the entire situation to Matthew. I told him this was not a simple family dispute over hurt feelings. This was a decade-long financial extraction, culminating in public humiliation. Matthew adjusted his glasses and reviewed the documents carefully, his eyes scanning the numbers. "A lot of this could be legally argued as voluntary family support," he said, tapping an expensive silver pen against his chin. "Courts usually view paying your parents' electric bill as a gift. However, these large lump sums, specifically the $8,000 for the roof repair, did you have any written agreement that this was a loan and not a gift?" I pulled out my phone and found the text message history from Daniel on the exact day of the transfer. I placed the phone on the desk and slid it toward Matthew. "Daniel, Josh, I need $8,000 today for the contractor or the roof caves in. I will pay you back in full by December when my annual bonus clears. Promise." Matthew read the text message. He smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant, predatory smile. That right there is a written acknowledgement of a loan. A loan he obtained under completely false pretenses, since he used the funds to purchase a luxury vehicle instead of repairing a property hazard. That is actionable fraud, Joshua. "I don't necessarily want to destroy them," I said quietly, looking out the massive window at the city skyline. "I just want them to realize I am not playing a game. I want them to leave me alone forever." Then we hit them where it hurts the absolute most. "The ego and the wallet," Matthew replied, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him. We spent the next hour drafting a formal legal demand letter. It was a brutal, merciless piece of paper. It laid out exactly how much money of mine had gone into keeping their household alive under false promises of repayment. It specifically demanded the immediate return of the $8,000 auto loan fraud. It stated clearly that if the funds were not repaid in full within 30 days, my legal counsel would file a civil lawsuit, place a heavy lien on their property, and potentially seek a court order to seize the Porsche in question. Matthew printed the letter on heavy, watermarked law firm stationery. I signed my name at the bottom. We sent the demand letter via certified mail to the Grayson house. They had to sign for it upon delivery. There was no ignoring this. 2 days later, my phone completely blew up. The tracking notification on my phone confirmed the letter was signed for and delivered at exactly 11 a.m. At 11:05 a.m., Daniel called me 6 times in a row. Elaine called 4 times. Elijah sent me a wall of text in all capital letters saying I was a psychopath who was tearing the family apart over money. I finally answered Daniel's 7th phone call. He was hyperventilating. The arrogant, demanding tone was completely gone. He sounded like a terrified, trapped animal. He asked if I would really drag my own flesh and blood into a public courtroom. He asked if I would really put a lien on the family home. "I am not doing anything to you," I said calmly. You did this to yourself. You threw a party to ask me to leave. I left. Now I simply want the money you stole from me back. He called me a heartless monster. He said a public lawsuit would humiliate the family name permanently. You should have thought about public humiliation before you hung a banner on your lawn and let Aunt Karen scream at me, I replied. You have exactly 30 days, Daniel. Sell the car. I hung up the phone and systematically blocked every single number associated with the Grayson family. The fallout from the legal demand letter was absolute, immediate, and breathtaking to witness. I did not have to lift another finger. I did not have to send another text message. Gravity and financial reality did all the heavy lifting for me. Because I had blocked all their phone numbers, the desperate updates reached me in fragmented pieces through gossiping neighbors and old acquaintances who loved to watch a train wreck. Samuel, the older gentleman who lived right next door to my parents, was the one who gave me the most satisfying, vivid update of the entire ordeal. Samuel called me on a brisk Friday morning. He had always liked me because I was the only person in the neighborhood who ever shoveled the heavy snow off his driveway during the brutal winters while my brother slept inside. Joshua, my boy, you are missing a heck of a show out here today, Samuel said, chuckling softly into the receiver. I'm standing on my front porch watering my petunias. There is a massive, heavy-duty tow truck backed right up into your dad's driveway. I closed my eyes, leaned back in my office chair, and let out a long, slow breath. Are they taking the Porsche, Sam? Oh, they are taking it all right. The repo guy has it hooked up to the hydraulic lift right now. Your dad is out there in his plaid bathrobe, waving his arms around frantically, screaming at the driver. Half the street is standing on their lawns watching. The driver didn't even flinch. He just handed your dad a yellow clipboard, turned around, and kept hoisting the luxury car up onto the flatbed. It is truly beautiful. Daniel could not secure a bank loan to pay me back the $8,000 because he was unemployed and a credit risk. He could not make the massive monthly payments on the Porsche himself because I was no longer funding the exorbitant grocery bills and the mortgage. The bank swooped in and repossessed the vehicle in broad daylight. The ultimate, shiny symbol of his fake success and massive ego was dragged down the street, while the neighbors he tried so incredibly hard to impress watched in complete, judgmental silence. The house was the next thing to crack. Without Daniel's income, and without my massive emergency injections of cash to cover the gaps, the mortgage fell severely behind. The bank notices piled up on the kitchen counter. They managed to avoid full foreclosure, but only barely. They had to go crawling to the bank and completely renegotiate their mortgage, taking on terrible, punishing interest rates just to keep a roof over their heads. The stress inside those walls must have been absolutely suffocating. The most fascinating part of the entire collapse was watching exactly how the extended family reacted to the disaster. When the Grayson house started rapidly sinking, all the loud, obnoxious relatives who had gladly attended my exile party suddenly vanished into thin air. Aunt Karen, the woman who screamed that I was a nobody, stopped dropping by for free drinks. Uncle David completely stopped answering Daniel's desperate phone calls. The people who had laughed the loudest and drank the most free beer when my belongings were thrown into the dirt had absolutely no interest in showing up with grocery money, loan offers, or practical support. They loved the free entertainment and the drama, but they absolutely hated the bill. Survival is an incredible, brutal motivator. When arrogant people are pushed to the absolute edge of ruin and finally realize nobody is coming to save them, they are forced to act. Daniel, a man who once considered manual labor completely beneath his dignity, had to take a job driving a delivery truck for a local, rundown hardware store. He spent his exhausting days hauling heavy bags of cement, stacks of drywall, and lumber, earning a tiny fraction of his old corporate salary. His massive ego was systematically dismantled and crushed every single time he had to clock in and take orders from a manager half his age. Elijah, the golden child who could not even wake up for a crucial licensing test, suddenly found himself facing actual starvation. With Elaine completely unable to afford premium groceries and Daniel absolutely refusing to give him a weekly allowance, Elijah was forced to get a job. The boy who was supposed to be a hotshot real estate agent wearing designer suits ended up wearing a greasy polyester uniform, working the miserable night shift at a 24-hour fast food drive-thru. Elaine completely stopped sending emotional text messages through other people's phones because every single door she used to enter my life was locked tight. She had to learn how to budget pennies. She had to learn how to buy generic brand medication. She had to learn how to live in the harsh, unforgiving reality her husband had created. They survived. People usually do when they have no other choice. But they had to survive without my blood, sweat, and money keeping them afloat. 6 months passed. Half a year completely away from the noise, the unreasonable demands, and the constant underlying anxiety of living under the same roof as the Graysons. My life looked entirely different. The promotion I had received at the logistics company came with a heavy, demanding workload, but I tackled it with a completely clear mind. Because I was no longer draining my bank account to fix someone else's busted plumbing, or paying someone else's college tuition, or funding fake luxury lifestyles, my savings account skyrocketed. The numbers just kept climbing, and for the first time in my life, I felt financially bulletproof. I moved out of the cramped, depressing apartment 304. I rented a beautiful, spacious loft in a much better, quieter part of the city. I bought actual high-quality furniture that matched perfectly. I started going to the gym every morning. I started sleeping 8 solid hours a night without waking up in a cold sweat, terrified that my phone was going to ring with a manufactured, expensive emergency. I even walked into a dealership on a Saturday afternoon and bought myself a vehicle. Not a flashy, absurd Porsche to show off to people I didn't like, but a solid, reliable, brand-new SUV. I paid for a huge chunk of it with my own cash, earned by my own hands, and I didn't owe a single explanation or apology to anyone in the world. For the first time in my 32 years on this earth, I experienced true, uninterrupted peace. The quiet was no longer an unfamiliar, terrifying void. It was my sanctuary. I learned how to cook actual meals instead of eating fast food in my car while rushing to solve my family's problems. I started reading books again. I started living for Joshua, not for the Grayson family name. There was only one last piece of unpleasant business I needed to handle to fully close this chapter of my life. The rumors. Even though my family was suffering quietly and working terrible jobs to survive, Aunt Karen and a few other bitter relatives were still spreading malicious lies. They told people in our extended network and at their local church that I had cruelly abandoned my parents in their old age. They painted me as a greedy, ungrateful, terrible son who got a big promotion, let the money go to his head, and completely turned his back on the loving people who raised him. I did not need to scream in public to defend myself. I did not need to expose them with long, dramatic speeches at family gatherings. I did not need to chase down every single rumor and argue with ignorant people. I just needed to calmly show the receipts. I logged into my private social media account, where a specific, targeted number of mutual family contacts and gossiping neighbors would definitely see it. I did not write a long, emotional, unhinged rant. I posted exactly 2 pictures side by side. The first picture was a screenshot of the legal demand letter specifically highlighting the $8,000 auto loan fraud committed by Daniel. The second picture was the photo I took on the night of my exile, the massive, insulting banner hanging from the trees calling me a freeloader, with Aunt Karen holding her drink in the background. I wrote exactly 1 sentence as the caption for the post. The son you publicly called a freeloader was paying more than all of you combined. From today on, he pays absolutely nothing. I hit post. I closed the app. I let the undeniable truth spread exactly where it needed to go. Within hours, the entire narrative completely flipped. The people who had quietly judged me suddenly saw the undeniable math. They saw the legal proof of fraud. The ugly rumors about my greed died instantly, replaced by a massive, crushing wave of shame directed squarely at the Grayson house. Daniel could not look his neighbors in the eye anymore when he left for his hardware store job. Elaine completely stopped going to her social clubs because the whispers were too loud. I took away their money, but the undeniable truth took away the only thing Daniel cared about more than cash: his precious public image. Sitting on the balcony of my new, quiet loft, drinking a cup of premium, expensive coffee, I finally understood the real, profound shape of revenge. For a long time, I thought revenge had to be active. I thought it had to be a fire you start in someone else's house to watch them burn. I thought it required screaming, destroying someone in a dramatic, movie-style confrontation, or ruining their lives purposefully. But I realized that real, terrifying revenge was simply letting them live inside the exact reality they had created for themselves, after they forcefully removed the one person who had constantly protected them from it. Real revenge was simply walking out the front door and taking the fire extinguisher with you. Real revenge was making them understand my absolute, undeniable value only after they had completely lost access to it forever. I didn't actually ruin Daniel's career. His own massive ego and terrible temper did that. I didn't fail Elijah's real estate exam. His own profound laziness and sense of entitlement did that. I didn't personally repossess the luxury Porsche. The bank did that because he couldn't afford a life he didn't earn. All I did was stop standing between my toxic family and the heavy consequences of their own foolish actions. Once I stepped away and removed my safety net, their entire universe collapsed under its own rotting weight. The anger that had been sitting in my chest for 10 years completely evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard indifference. They were no longer my responsibility. They were just people I used to know, struggling to survive in a world that requires actual effort. I still think about that damp front lawn sometimes. I think about the harsh, blinding floodlights, the loud, obnoxious country music, the cruel banner swinging between the oak trees, and the drunken laughter of my relatives. I still clearly remember the pathetic thud of that grilled hot dog hitting the grass near my expensive work shoes while Daniel smirked at me. But when I remember that Tuesday night now, I do not feel any lingering shame. I do not feel any burning anger. I only feel an immense, crystal-clear sense of clarity. Because that night was the exact moment the Grayson family revealed exactly who they were without their masks. And more importantly, it was the night Joshua Grayson completely stopped belonging to them. It was the night I stopped being a human ATM, stopped being a shock absorber for their failures, and finally started becoming my own person. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, and it certainly wasn't an easy one to live through. I share this deeply personal chapter of my life because I know there are so many people out there right now, breaking their backs to hold up a ceiling for people who would gladly watch them be crushed if it served their interests. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, where your immense kindness was mistaken for weakness, and your help was aggressively demanded instead of appreciated? If you made it all the way to the end of this incredibly long video, I have a special, specific request for you. Please drop the letter W in the comments below right now. W stands for winner. It is our secret code for the 1% Club, the group of absolutely amazing people who understand the incredible value of setting boundaries and who stayed with me until the very end of this journey. Seeing those W's in the comments section lets me know I am speaking to the right crowd of survivors. Please don't forget to hit that like button and follow the channel. We are going to share a lot more stories about standing up for yourself, walking away from toxicity, and taking back total control of our lives. Until next time, stay strong, protect your hard-earned peace, and never, ever let anyone convince you that you are worthless just because you stopped being useful to them.